Okay, I am Brittany Lafayette, and I'm doing my presentation on deaf, hard of hearing, or hearing impaired. There's 4 terms describing different types of hearing loss. There's hearing impaired, which is used to describe people with any degree of hearing loss. This is seen as a negative term and not the preferred term, and people don't really use it anymore at all. Hard of hearing is when the hearing loss has enough residual hearing that through an auditory device, like a hearing aid or a cochlear implant, that they can process speech. Deaf is when the hearing loss is so severe that there is little or no functional hearing. Deafened is when you lose your hearing as an adult, and they would face different challenges than someone who lost it as a child or at birth. Deaf or deafened and hard of hearing individuals may choose to use hearing aids, cochlear implants, or other assistive listening devices to boost their available hearing. They may also use ASL, which is American Sign Language. They can have sign language interpreters, and they could read lips or use captioning. And many people have problems with their own speech since they cannot hear their own voice. Many don't talk at all. Hearing loss can be mild, moderate, severe, or profound, which means they don't hear at all. It can affect one ear or both ears. Sometimes you'll see a lowercase d for deaf or an uppercase d, and this is why it says we use the lowercase deaf when referring to an audiological condition of not hearing, and the uppercase deaf when referring to a particular group of deaf people who share a language, American Sign Language, and a culture. The members of this group have inherited their sign language, use it as a primary means of communication among themselves, and hold a set of beliefs about themselves and their connection to the larger society. We distinguish them from, for example, those who find themselves losing their hearing because of illness, trauma, or age. Although these people share the condition of not hearing, they do not have access to the knowledge, beliefs, and practices that make up the culture of deaf people. Causes of hearing loss can be genetic factors, infections, and these can happen either during the prenatal period, or after birth. Meningitis is the most popular infection that causes hearing loss. Birth asphyxia, low birth rate, hyperbilirubinemia, which is severe jaundice when you're an infant. It's when they're yellow. Chronic ear infections. Factors that could happen at any time, like impacted earwax, trauma to the head or ear, loud noises, medicines, a nutritional deficiency could cause it, delayed onset or progressive genetic hearing loss. To get a diagnosis for being deaf or hard of hearing, it would be medical testing, and they do one for all newborns in the hospital, the newborn hearing screening, and they're actually trying the National Association of Deaf People is trying to make it so that if your newborn did, I don't know if you would say pass or fail, if they showed that they would be deaf or hard of hearing, to have someone there other than the doctor to tell you the results, so that someone who's deaf or works with deaf people, so that you would have more knowledge about sign language right away, and about the culture, because lots of times doctors or parents are nervous and they just want to fix it right away. They want to do whatever they can to fix it, and sign language isn't an option. And so they're trying to make it so that sign language can be the first option and that families could have it as soon as possible. You can also do hearing tests anytime after that initial one if you think you were starting to lose hearing, or someone you know, or your child. My son actually had to have them done at like 1, 2, and 3 years old, because like they kept getting inconsistent test results like at 1 and 2 years old, and he didn't talk till he was well over 3, so they thought that his hearing was the problem why he wasn't talking. Some statistics, about 2 to 3 out of every 1,000 children are born with a detectable level of hearing loss in one or both ears. 90% of children are born to hearing parents. And because of this, at most 40% of families with school-age deaf children use sign language at home. And so many deaf children, perhaps as many as 70%, are deprived of language. And in other countries, developing countries, especially children with hearing loss and deafness, don't even get to go to school. So they would just never be able to communicate at all. 15% of American adults report trouble with hearing, and by 2050, nearly 2.5 billion people are projected to have some degree of hearing loss, and at least 700 million will require hearing rehabilitation. And Section 504 is where it talks about deaf and hard of hearing students and parents have equal access and an equal opportunity to participate in public school services, programs, and activities. And this would include providing interpreters or CART. And CART is, where's my paper? Real-time captioning or auxiliary aids, which would include like qualified interpreters, note takers, transcription services, written materials, telephone handset amplifiers, assistive listening devices, assistive listening systems, telephones compatible with hearing aids, closed caption decoders, open and closed captioning, telecommunication devices for deaf persons, video text displays, or other effective methods making it able to hear, or making materials available to individuals with hearing impairments. And sometimes, like, just because you could have one deaf student that can sign, so they would need an interpreter, but you might have another one who doesn't use sign language, and so they would need a computer-assisted transcript like CART or like more different auxiliary aids. So just, it would depend on each student what you would need. And so, and the accommodations, so like we said, the qualified interpreters, and my sister is an interpreter for sign language, and she works for Utah Schools for the Deaf, and she's worked with a couple different age groups. She's worked with a couple of younger kids before, and neither of the younger kids' families signed, so they only got to see someone sign or talk with someone at school with her, and they didn't learn it till they went to school, because if your family doesn't sign and you don't learn it and you go to school, then you wouldn't know it either. And so they just get behind, because then they're needing to learn to sign and to do all the normal school things, learning and reading and math and all that. And right now she works at a school for older kids. So they've graduated from high school. Her student is, I think he's 19 years old. And so he's learning how to live on his own. So it's school from like 19 to 21. And so she goes with him to cooking classes, and she goes grocery shopping with him. They go to laundromats. She goes to his job. And so they're hoping by the time he graduates this school that then he'd be able to go to work on his own, that job will be able to, they'll be able to understand each other. So yeah, interpreters can go all through college. Schools, real-time captioning, which is CART, assistive listening devices, auxiliary aids. As a teacher, it's important to have communication, whether it's through the interpreter or through them just being able to have cochlear implants and just being able to really find a way to communicate with them. Schools have to have visual flashing fire alarms and entry systems that don't just use voice activation. Students like to sit in the front row. And they like when to reduce background noise, kids with cochlear implants and say that the windows need to be closed, hallway doors need to be closed, and that just to avoid side conversations, they can just pick up all these little things with their devices, and that makes it really hard to focus. Note taking and like transcription services, written materials, having everything on Canvas that you're doing, all those things would really help students. These are two clips about, one is about deaf and hard of hearing students in the classroom, and the other one is about making education accessible to deaf children. And the one who does that one, he's deaf and he's traveled, and his parents were deaf, and so he didn't realize that people didn't learn sign language if their parents didn't know it, or that was a thing. He just thought everyone had this wonderful, lovely home and language to share, and he didn't realize that people didn't have it, and so he's trying to make it more accessible to all children. So thanks.